We are taught that history is shaped by brilliant minds and great strategies. That is a nice story, but it leaves out the best part: the absolute idiots. This is not a list of minor missteps. This is a celebration of the most gloriously incompetent figures who ever held power, whose legendary blunders prove that high rank and low intelligence are a timelessly explosive combination. First, death by bookcase. Let us begin with a quiet death, a truly stupid, quiet death. Charles Valentin Alkan was a French composer of the 19th century and one of the greatest piano virtuosos of his time, a rival of Chopin and Liszt. So how did this musical titan meet his end? In a burst of glory while completing a masterpiece? No. According to legend, Alkan, a deeply religious man, reached for a copy of the Talmud on the very top shelf of his massive bookcase. When he pulled the book, the entire heavy piece of furniture tipped over and crushed him. You would think that a man who could command dozens of piano keys with divine precision would have had a better understanding of basic physics. This was not a dramatic, poetic ending. It was one final ironic footnote delivered by a piece of furniture. Second, Xerxes whips the sea. Since we are speaking of figures with an inflated sense of their own power, let us talk about Xerxes I, the king of Persia. When a violent storm destroyed his carefully constructed pontoon bridges across the Hellespont, Xerxes did not merely become angry. He became biblically, absurdly angry. He decided that the sea itself was guilty of disobedience. So he did what every rational, all-powerful ruler would do. He ordered the ocean to be punished. His soldiers were ordered to whip the water 300 times while also shouting insults into it. They even branded the sea with hot irons. Imagine being the soldier class assigned to that job. It was the ancient world's equivalent of screaming at a broken printer, but with an entire army and far more theatrical drama. Unsurprisingly, the sea issued no formal apology. Third, the chicken named Rome. If fighting the ocean seems stupid, how about placing a chicken above your empire? Meet the Roman Emperor Honorius. In 410 AD, the Goths sacked the city of Rome. It was a truly catastrophic event. A messenger hurried to the emperor and delivered the devastating news with the words, "Rome has fallen." Instead of showing shock or grief, Honorius reportedly breathed a sigh of relief. Why? Because he thought the messenger was speaking about his favorite household chicken, which he had cleverly named Rome. The capital of the Western world was burning to the ground, and the man at the top was mainly concerned about the welfare of his poultry. You truly cannot make this stuff up. The empire may be collapsing, but thank God the chicken is okay. Fourth, the roller skating tiger. Every great invention needs a great product demonstration. John Joseph Merlin, the inventor of early roller skates, understood that. To reveal his creation to the world in the 1760s, he planned a truly spectacular entrance at a fashionable masquerade gathering in London. He strapped on his new skates, picked up his violin to play a tune, and rolled gracefully into the room. The crowd was stunned. What genius! What flair! There was only one tiny detail he had overlooked in his design process: a braking mechanism. Merlin, gliding elegantly while playing music, Suts realized that he had no way to stop. He sped across the ballroom floor and crashed directly into a massive full-length mirror, shattering the glass, his violin, and his dignity all at once. Fifth, Ibrahim the Mad. Next comes the Ottoman Sultan Ibrahim of Yurs, a man whose nickname, the Mad, was not just for show. It was a title he earned enthusiastically. Ibrahim had a few obsessions, including corpulent women and extravagant furs, but his defining trait was explosive paranoia. According to later accounts, one day he became convinced that someone in his massive harem of 280 concubines had been unfaithful. His solution was not to open an investigation. It was to implement a policy of total workforce liquidation. He supposedly ordered all 280 women to be tied into weighted sacks and thrown into the Bosporus to drown. It is a management style that is certainly decisive, if nothing else. Forget dealing with human resources. Ibrahim's approach was simple: restart the entire system by drowning it. Sixth, the rabbit plague. Here is a lesson in unintended consequences, served with a side of rabbit stew. In 1859, a British settler in Australia named Thomas Austin felt a little homesick. What he missed most was hunting. So he thought it would be a magnificent idea to import European rabbits onto his estate for a bit of sport. In his own fateful words, he declared that the introduction of a few rabbits could do little harm. That may be the most catastrophic understatement in ecological history. Those few rabbits multiplied like, well, rabbits. Within decades, their population had exploded into the hundreds of millions, causing an environmental disaster, wiping out native species, and devastating farmland across the continent. All because one man simply wanted to shoot at something familiar. Seventh, Eugene Schieffelin and the Starlings. If you thought introducing rabbits was a bad idea, meet Eugene Schieffelin, a New York pharmacist and amateur naturalist who became remembered as the world's greatest Shakespeare fanboy. According to the popular story, his life mission was truly bizarre. He wanted to introduce every single bird mentioned in the works of William Shakespeare to North America. In the 1890s, after a few failed attempts with other birds, he released European starlings in Central Park. Unfortunately for North America, the starlings thrived. Today, their population is counted in the hundreds of millions. They are an aggressive, destructive, invasive species that drives out native birds, damages crops, and has even been linked to an airplane crash. All this ecological chaos, not for profit or conquest, but because one man supposedly really loved Shakespeare. Eighth, the Cadaver Synod. Most legal systems agree that the accused should probably be alive for his trial. Pope Stephen VI, however, disagreed. In 897, he held a grudge against his dead predecessor, Pope Formosus. So he arranged what is now known as the Cadaver Synod. He had Formosus's 9-month-old corpse dug up, dressed in full papal robes, and propped on a throne in the courtroom to face charges. A frightened young deacon was appointed to act as the corpse's defender, forced to answer questions on behalf of the rotting body. Unsurprisingly, the dead pope was found guilty. As punishment, his blessing fingers were cut off, and his body was dragged through the streets and thrown into the river. It is a breathtaking reminder that even the highest office on earth is not immune to petty, raging madness. Ninth, the messenger of Genghis Khan. If there was ever a historical moment that perfectly illustrated the concept of do not mess with the wrong person, this is it. In the early 13th century, Genghis Khan, a man you really did not want to anger, sent a diplomatic and trade mission to the neighboring Khwarezmian Empire. The ruler, Shah Muhammad II, had a brilliant idea. Instead of welcoming them, he decided to execute the Mongol envoys. Now, there are a few universal rules in diplomacy, and rule number 1 is, you do not kill the messenger. The Shah did not merely break that rule. He shattered it. Genghis Khan's response was not a strongly worded letter. It was the complete and total destruction of the Khwarezmian Empire. He did not merely conquer it. He erased it from the map. A brutal lesson in why you never, ever poke a hornet's nest. 10th, Francisco Solano Lopez. Everyone needs a role model, but it is probably best to choose one who plays in your league. Francisco Solano Lopez, the dictator of Paraguay in the 19th century, saw himself as the Napoleon of South America. Filled with this grandiose self-image, he decided to prove his military genius by starting the War of the Triple Alliance. The problem was that the Triple Alliance consisted of Brazil, Argentina, and Uruguay. He literally declared war on his 3 much larger neighbors at the same time. It was less a strategic masterpiece than a national suicide pact. The result was one of the most catastrophic conflicts in modern history, leading to the death of a huge share of Paraguay's adult male population. He may have thought he was Napoleon, but he ended as the architect of his own nation's demographic collapse. 11th, Emperor Pertinax. Here is a quick lesson in management from the Roman Empire. When Emperor Pertinax took power in 1903 AD, he inherited a corrupt and undisciplined Praetorian Guard. These were the imperial elite bodyguards who had just murdered his predecessor. Pertinax decided that his very first act in office should be to impose discipline and, most importantly, reduce their pay. Let that sink in. His plan was to reform his own notoriously violent, sword-wielding bodyguards by taking away their money. It is a classic case of completely misreading the room. The Praetorian Guard responded to this brilliant human resources initiative exactly as you would expect. After only 87 days on the job, they stormed the palace and murdered him. It was a reign so short that he barely had time to warm the throne. 12th, the auction of the Roman Empire. If you cannot earn it, why not simply buy it? After the murder of Pertinax, the Praetorian Guard did something truly incredible. They put the Roman Empire up for auction. The highest bidder was a wealthy senator named Didius Julianus. He literally bought the throne by offering the guards more cash than his rival. For one brief moment, he was the most powerful man in the world. The only problem was that he had zero political support, no loyalty from the legions, and the Roman people despised him. His reign was a 66-day farce that ended when a more competent general, Septimius Severus, marched on Rome. Julianus was promptly executed. He learned the hard way that you can buy the title, but not actual power, especially when the sellers are the only friends you have. 13th, Sultan Murad IV. Sultan Murad IV of the Ottoman Empire was a man of contradictions. He was deeply concerned about public order and believed that coffeehouses were breeding grounds for political dissent and rebellion. His solution was a complete ban on coffee. He was reportedly so serious about it that he disguised himself and walked through the streets of Istanbul at night. If he caught someone drinking coffee, he had them punished severely, and some accounts claim he ordered executions on the spot. So, what was the preferred drink of this strict moral guardian? Alcohol. Murad was known for heavy drinking. He banned the drink that fueled conversation and intellectual debate, while personally consuming a substance famous for causing chaos and poor judgment. It is hypocrisy on a truly imperial scale. 14th, Oliver Cromwell. If you have ever met a person who simply radiates joylessness, they were probably channeling Oliver Cromwell as Lord Protector of England in the 17th century. This Puritan leader and the wider Puritan government decided that fun was the enemy. They launched a broad war against happiness. Christmas celebrations were banned. Theaters had been shut down. Many sports were condemned, and public morality was tightly policed. They essentially tried to turn an entire country into a joyless gray waiting room. The English people hated it so much that after Cromwell's death and the restoration of the monarchy, they did not simply move on. They dug up Cromwell's body, put his corpse on trial for treason, and executed him posthumously. That is how much they missed their parties. 15th, the flight of Louis XVI. If you are a king running for your life during a violent revolution, subtlety is the key. That was a lesson the French King Louis XVI completely failed to learn. As the French Revolution raged, he and his family tried to flee the country, but they did not do it quietly in the middle of the night. No, they used a massive, luxurious, slow-moving coach. To make matters worse, they did not exactly keep a low profile on the road. They stopped for refined meals and greeted people who recognized them. It was less a desperate escape than a royal parade. Unsurprisingly, they were easily identified and arrested, plus a mistake that helped seal their fate with the guillotine. It was one of the stupidest escape plans in history. 16th, Ethelred the Unready. Sometimes a person's nickname tells you everything you need to know. Meet Ethelred the Unready, a king of England in the late 10th and early 11th centuries. Now, unready here does not mean he forgot his keys. It comes from Old English and means badly advised, and boy did he earn that name. His great strategy for dealing with constant Viking invasions was simply to pay them to go away. This payment became known as Dangeld. It worked wonderfully for a while. The Vikings took the massive bribe and left. But then they realized something. If you could get a fortune for almost invading England, why not come back next year and ask for more? Ethelred's policy turned England into the world's most reliable ATM for raiders. It bled his kingdom dry and ensured that the Vikings would always return. 17th, Thomas Midgley Jr. Some people leave a footprint in history. Thomas Midgley Jr. left a gigantic toxic crater. This American chemist may be one of the single human beings who caused the most damage to the planet. First, in the 1920s, he helped develop leaded gasoline to stop engine knocking in cars. This released immense quantities of neurotoxic lead into the atmosphere, poisoning generations of people and the environment. But he was not finished. He then helped develop chlorofluorocarbons, better known as CFCs, which became standard refrigerants and aerosol propellants. Those compounds later became infamous for damaging the Earth's ozone layer. In a final darkly ironic twist, after contracting polio, Midgley designed a system of ropes and pulleys to help him get out of bed. He later became entangled in that system and died by strangulation. He was literally killed by his own bad invention. 18th, Alexander Bogdanov. The search for eternal youth has led people to do strange things. But the Russian physician and revolutionary Alexander Bogdanov took it to an entirely new, blood-soaked level. He believed he could achieve rejuvenation, and possibly even immortality, through experimental blood transfusions. He founded an entire institute dedicated to this idea. In 1928, Bogdanov decided to perform another transfusion on himself. The donor was a student suffering from malaria and tuberculosis. Bogdanov, blinded by his own theories, saw no problem with this. The result was predictable. Shortly after filling himself with diseased blood, he died a painful death. He was not merely wrong. His search for eternal life directly and idiotically led to his own downfall. 19th, the Lemonade Sea. If you think blood transfusions for immortality are strange, let me introduce you to the concept of a lemonade ocean. Albert Brisbane was a follower of the utopian socialist Charles Fourier, a philosopher with some, let us say, imaginative ideas. One of Fourier's famous predictions was that in a future state of perfect social harmony, the oceans would lose their saltiness and turn into a delicious planet-sized glass of lemonade. Brisbane was not just a passive believer in this theory. He was an evangelist for it. He spent a significant portion of his personal fortune and devoted his life to promoting Fourier's ideas, including the coming arrival of the great global lemonade sea. You have to admire the optimism, but you also have to question the mind of a man waiting for the tide to come in citrus-flavored. 20th, Muhammad bin Tughlaq. Muhammad bin Tughlaq, the Sultan of Delhi in the 14th century, was a man with big ideas. Unfortunately, many of them were spectacularly foolish. First, he decided to move the capital of his empire from Delhi to Daulatabad, a city more than 1,000 kilometers away. He did not merely move his court. He ordered large sections of Delhi's population to march there. Many died on the way. Then, after arriving, he changed his mind and ordered people to march back. But his genius did not stop there. He also introduced a new currency, minting copper and brass coins, and declaring that they had the same value as gold and silver. This immediately led to mass counterfeiting. People were literally minting coins in their kitchens, triggering a complete economic collapse. He was a one-man wrecking ball of bad policy. 21st, Arthur of Brittany. The phrase, "learn from your mistakes," was clearly not in the vocabulary of Arthur of Brittany. During the era of the 100 Years' War, this Breton noble was remembered in anecdotal retellings for an unfortunate habit of being captured by the English. It happened once, and his family paid a massive ransom to get him back. You would think he would be more careful after that, but no. He was captured a second time, and once again a huge ransom was paid. At that point, any rational person would probably stay away from battles for a while. Not Arthur. He went back into combat and, like clockwork, was captured a third time. Each time, his release cost a fortune. He was less a warrior than a recurring, incredibly expensive subscription service for the English army. 22nd, Otto of Bavaria. Being king usually involves, ruling. But for Otto of Bavaria, the job was purely ceremonial, mainly because he had been declared mentally unfit even before he effectively took the throne. For his long reign in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, Otto lived secluded in a palace under constant medical supervision, largely detached from his royal status. He issued no decrees and met no diplomats. His days were spent under the shadow of severe mental illness. He was a king in name only, a monarch whose throne stood empty while he lived as a prisoner of his own mind. 23rd, the Jiajing Emperor. The Jiajing Emperor of China in the 16th century was obsessed with one thing: living forever. He neglected his duties as emperor to focus entirely on his search for immortality, and turned to court alchemists for a solution. These men brewed a variety of life-extending elixirs for him. The main ingredient in many of these magical potions was mercury. The emperor dutifully consumed these mixtures, believing they would purify his body and lead him to eternal life. Instead, as modern science would have told him, he was slowly and systematically poisoning himself with a heavy metal. In a twist that should have surprised absolutely no one, the emperor's immortality elixir ended up killing him. A classic case of the cure being infinitely worse than the disease. 24th, Mithridates. Mithridates VI of Pontus was the most paranoid king of the ancient world. His greatest fear was being murdered by poison. To fight this, he developed a meticulous routine of taking tiny, non-lethal doses of every poison known to man, hoping to build total immunity. For years, he was his own personal walking toxicology laboratory, and in a way, it worked. When the Romans finally defeated him in battle, he chose suicide rather than captivity. He reached for his trusted vial of poison, the one weapon against which he believed he was immune, and drank it. Nothing happened. His lifelong paranoia had paid off so well that he literally could not poison himself. In one final frustrating irony, he had to order one of his own guards to kill him with a sword. 25th, the King's Dream. Leaders often rely on advisors, intelligence reports, or strategic analysis to make critical decisions. A certain Cambodian king of the 19th century, however, supposedly relied on his dreams. According to historical anecdote, this monarch had a particularly vivid nightmare one night in which he saw his entire navy completely destroyed. Instead of waking up and dismissing it as a bad dream, he took it as divine prophecy. The very next morning, he gave a shocking order: dismantle the entire Cambodian fleet. Just like that, based on a single bad dream, the nation's naval defense was gone. It is a foreign policy decision-making process that makes flipping a coin look like a sophisticated strategic exercise. One can only wonder what would have happened if he had dreamed that his palace was made of cheese. 26th, King Farouk. Most monarchs collect art, land, or titles. King Farouk of Egypt collected things he stole. He was remembered as a kleptomaniac on an international scale. This was not a secret habit. It was a well-known part of his character. He stole everything from ceremonial swords to random trinkets from his hosts and fellow dignitaries. His boldest and most famous alleged theft happened during a meeting with Winston Churchill. While the British Prime Minister was distracted, King Farouk supposedly managed to steal Churchill's prized pocket watch straight from his vest. Churchill, a man not easily shaken, eventually realized what had happened and had to diplomatically demand its return. It is one thing to be a king. It is another level of audacity to be a king who is also a common pickpocket. 27th, Algernon Sidney. Writing can be a powerful tool for expressing ideas. For the then 17th century English politician Algernon Sidney, it was also a self-signed death warrant. Sidney was a committed Republican who rejected the idea of absolute monarchy. He wrote down his political theories in a manuscript, arguing that monarchs had no divine right to rule, and that citizens had the right to resist tyranny. The problem was that he never published it. When he was accused of high treason, government agents searched his house, found the unpublished manuscript, and used his own private writings as primary evidence against him at his trial. He was convicted and executed based on words he had written for himself. He literally wrote his way to the gallows. 28th, Tsar Nicholas II. When your country is involved in one of the greatest wars in human history, you need your best people at the head of the military. Tsar Nicholas II of Russia had a different idea. In the middle of the First World War, as Russia suffered devastating losses, he made the catastrophic decision to dismiss the experienced commander-in-chief of the army and personally take command himself. The only problem was that he had no real military experience for such a role. This move was a disaster. It meant that every later military failure, every defeat, and every sacrifice was now directly and personally tied to him. This decision did not merely damage the war effort. It shattered his reputation, fueled public anger, and greatly accelerated the arrival of the Russian Revolution, which would ultimately destroy him and his entire family. 29th, the destruction of the treasure fleet. In the early 15th century, China possessed one of the most powerful and advanced naval fleets on the planet. The legendary treasure fleet, commanded by Admiral Zheng He, consisted of massive ships that dwarfed anything in Europe. They explored the Indian Ocean, reached Africa and Arabia, and established a commanding Chinese presence across the seas. And then the imperial leadership decided that it was all a waste of money. In a breathtaking reversal, the Ming Dynasty leadership declared that foreign exploration was unnecessary. The great voyages ended, the ships were left to decay or were dismantled, and China turned inward, adopting a policy of isolation that would last for centuries. They had the world at their fingertips and simply decided to throw it away, a decision that changed the course of global history. 30th, Panfilo de Narvaez. Panfilo de Narvaez was a Spanish conquistador who led one of the most disastrous expeditions in the history of the Americas. In 1528, he landed in Florida with hundreds of men and a fleet of ships. His first brilliant move was to split his forces. He sent the ships up the coast to meet him later, while he led his men inland through the dense, hostile, and completely unknown swamps and forests of Florida. Surprise, surprise! The ships and the land party never found each other again. Narvaez's men were plagued by hunger, disease, and constant attacks from indigenous groups. In desperation, they eventually built crude rafts to try to sail to Mexico. Of the original expedition members, only 4 survived the ordeal and reached Mexico. It was a masterclass in how not to explore. 31st, John Sedgwick. Sometimes a person's last words are a profound summary of their life. Other times, they are a monument to spectacular miscalculation. General John Sedgwick was a respected Union commander during the American Civil War. At the Battle of Spotsylvania in 1864, he was directing his troops when he noticed that some of them were ducking to avoid long-range enemy sniper fire. Annoyed by their fear, Sedgwick stood upright and scolded them with the now infamous last words. They couldn't hit an elephant at this distance. A moment later, a Confederate sharpshooter's bullet struck him just below the left eye and killed him instantly. It was a tragic, ironic, and brutally effective lesson in not underestimating your enemy, delivered at the speed of a bullet. 32nd, the donkey as a reward. Here we have a story that sits on the narrow line between idiocy and genius. Spiridon Louis was a humble Greek water carrier who became a national hero. After winning the first modern Olympic marathon at the Athens Games in 1896, his victory was a moment of immense pride for the host nation. After the race, the king of Greece was so overjoyed that he offered Louis any gift he desired. He could have asked for riches, land, a government position, anything. Instead, Louis, a practical man, thought for a moment and asked for a new donkey and cart to help him with his job as a water carrier. He was offered the world, and he chose to upgrade his work vehicle. Was it a foolish rejection of wealth or a brilliant act of staying true to his humble roots? History is still debating that. 33rd, the sale of Alaska. In 1867, the Russian Empire decided it was time for a spring cleaning of its assets. One of its least profitable and hardest to manage territories was Alaska, a vast, remote, and seemingly useless expanse of ice and rock. Convinced that it was little more than a frozen wasteland, Tsar Alexander II sold the entire territory to the United States for $7.2 million. That was about 2 cents per acre. Americans widely mocked the purchase at the time as Seward's folly, thinking their government had bought a gigantic icebox. Then, only a few decades later, massive gold deposits were discovered, followed eventually by some of the largest oil reserves on the planet. Russia had, in a moment of spectacular short-sightedness, sold a territory bursting with immeasurable natural wealth for the bargain price of a small royal wedding. In conclusion, these are 33 exhibits of glorious, world-changing incompetence. But we know the hall of shame is vast, and the competition is fierce. So who is the one unforgivable omission from this list? Whose monumental act of idiocy did we criminally overlook? And why do they deserve the 34th place? Make your case in the comments below. If you enjoyed this procession of terrible decisions, pass judgment on that like button and subscribe for more.